We're celebrating our 300th episode of Paper Napkin Wisdom with a special bonus. Go to papernapkinwisdom.com, scroll to the contact form at the bottom, and type the word book. We will send you 3 free ebooks: the Demand Blueprint, the Profit Blueprint for Mastering Cash Flow, and the Paper Napkin Wisdom Gratitude Ritual. That's a $25 value, all yours free. Just sign up at papernapkinwisdom.com.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govind Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govind Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom episode 304. And today, you're about to hear a conversation that could totally shift the way you think about leadership, relationships, and change. And my guest is someone I've admired and shared a friendship with for years, Dr. Malik Muhammad. Malik has spent decades guiding communities, schools, and organizations toward equity, growth, and transformation. His work with TLI Services and Akoben has touched lives all over the world. But what makes this conversation special isn't just the resume, it's the wisdom he brings on a single napkin. And I'll admit that I first heard this message around a campfire on Lake Powell. Today he's written a simple yet profound formula, and you're going to wonder what that could mean for your life, your leadership, your team, and even your family if you leaned into the challenge he sets forth today. As you listen, notice where this applies most in your world. You may discover a fresh way to see your relationships or a new key to unlocking growth in your work. Either way, you'll find that Malik's wisdom is both practical and deeply human. Let's listen in. Dr. Malik Muhammad, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to see you on the show at long last.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here, brother. It's been some time in the making. So thank you for keeping the fire burning.
Malik, you are the king of being understated in most things you say, and saying this has been some time in the making is definitely speaking of a broth that would put Korean and Japanese broths to shame. This has been brewing for a long time with some very, very special ingredients. So for those of you who haven't picked up on it already, Malik and I go way back. We are obviously good friends.
Absolutely.
And you know how many people look like their dogs. In my case, I look like my friends. So I look I look like Malik.
That's right.
And that's the greatest compliment in the world because he's a dear friend and a big-hearted man. Malik, you go around the world doing all kinds of really great work, and I've seen you share this pearl of wisdom publicly, and I'm excited to bring this to our community because I know we're going to take it to a different level together.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, just back to looking like your friends, that means that you choose well and wisely, man. You know, it's that. And I've said, you know, to you many times that you remind me of the spirit of my brother, my biological brother, and philosophically and ideologically we are so very close as brothers. So thank you for this invitation. Thank you for all that you poured into me as well.
It's been a privilege. The napkin that you share with me is connection plus challenge equals change.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about this for a long time, and I'm excited to talk about it here. But the formula is, why did you share this with me?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about how do we distill some of the things that we've been doing, whether it's working with young people or adults that are marginalized, that are misunderstood in society, or those who are just wanting to make a contribution in leadership, and thinking about how to put it in the most succinct way. And so fewer words obviously make sense to do that, but then also a formula speaks to something. And this is what I find myself talking about everywhere, all over the world, and at all times. It keeps coming back to this very simple formula of connection plus challenge equals change. So um, that's what I am sharing, thinking about, really trying to unpack for my own life and identify. And so, yeah, it keeps coming back to that.
You know, and you very humbly talk about sharing it around the world and developing this for young men in mostly urban communities and making it something simple. But it's amazing how well it resonates in a leadership context, because that's where I heard it, in a very unique mastermind put together by a mutual mentor of ours, Warren Rustand, and he brought us alongside other wonderful leaders. And you first shared it with me then, and you broke down the formula in some detail. So let's do
Yeah.
that for the people who are new to this formula. But I want the listeners to understand that while Malik talks about sharing this with young people who are in need of community, you're sharing this with CEOs of 100 million plus corporations, and they align with it just as easily. This is a powerful formula.
Yeah, yeah. I think, where I find myself most of the time now is really working with leaders that are thinking about how can they take, life-giving principles, people-centered principles, community organization centered principles, and become the leaders that we need for the moment, right? Leaders that we need for the season. And so I'm spending a lot more time doing that, and have been now for probably the past decade, than the direct work with young people. And so, yeah, when we think about connection, I really, really, really like what Dr. Brene Brown defines connection as: the energy that exists when we feel seen, heard, and valued. I just think that's spot on, right? Because I think connection, when we are experiencing it in relationship, feels like energy. It feels like this electricity, right? When I'm with my best friends, when I'm with my wife of 31 years, when I'm with my children, when I'm with my dogs, right? When I'm with other leaders, entrepreneurs or otherwise, that it feels like this electric, feels like this energy, because we feel seen, heard, and valued. And there's this reciprocal and dialectical thing that's happening where we increase the levels of vulnerability and self-disclosure. And then challenge, we've been defining that as it's when we're sitting in that space of accountability and holding to metrics and having a bias towards action and saying and doing and hearing and the things that are hard to say, do, and hear, because they're necessary and requirement for growth. And so challenge becomes that sort of grittiness that we need in order to grow. And then when we combine those two things, right, connection plus challenge, it equals change, and change as transformation, as real change, right? Not change of clothes, change of something superficial, but really change in quality and transformation. In fact, we would have said, and I often say this, we would have said that connection plus challenge equals transformation, but it doesn't sound as sexy. So connection plus challenge equals change really fits. And what we've been able to do is sort of apply that across context. Doesn't matter what we're talking about, right? That formula seems to fit in a universal way.
I think it's a powerful formula, and I think it has a lot to it. And I think it's interesting that you start off with energy, right? And connection is energy, right? And it can't be
Absolutely.
faked, can it?
That's right.
And that's one of the things, we know it because we know it. We recognize that energetic connection when somebody sees us, hears us, um, and values us in a meaningful way. So, how do you slow people down to make a connection in this increasingly transactional environment that we're in?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's a reminder that connection is our natural way, right? To see our humanity first is how we as human beings have designed sort of this journey with each other, right? So in other words, it's why when we see someone, we say hello, right? Or or we bow, or we shake hands, or we hug. All of that is really uh, designed because as human beings, we've said we want to put our humanity right up front. In fact, we're taken aback when someone just jumps right into the business of a thing, right? When sort of tells us to move or tells us what the agenda is, but doesn't sort of see our humanity and kind of pause in that way. And in many cultures, certainly non Western cultures, the ritual of connection is so important that if not done well and done right and with time, it impacts whether or not the transaction will even happen. Right. And, you see this. In movies around the world, but you also see it in like old school mafia movies, right? Like when the young mafioso is sort of jumping right in and wants to talk about business, and the old heads are kind of looking at each other and saying, "Oh, this guy, what's he doing?" Right?
Well, Don
Like we're
Corleone
talking
does
about.
that. You
Say it
have to
again.
forgive my son.
Yes,
He speaks when he should be listening. I
exactly.
spoil my children,
There it
right?
is.
He
There
says
it
the
is.
line right
That's
there.
exactly right. There it is. Right. And so reminding folks that it's just a human thing for us to put connection up front. And then we forget it, right? When we get into organizational cultures, when we get into classrooms, when we get into meetings. And so reminding folks is the human thing to do, and then giving them a process, something that we call connection before content, giving them those words and that practice to make it always on the agenda. So before we jump into the content of anything, class, meeting, event, whatever, that we need to take a moment and structure it to connect. So it could look like a question that we just all answer, right? Just a one word feelings check. It could be, sort of turn to the person next to you and tell them one thing that's happened good or one thing that's on your heart, right? But sort of we pause and check. And we've been normalizing that in our organizations, the organizations that I lead, but then also with our clients and partner organizations. And at first it's weird until it's not. And so they know when they get on with us, whether it's virtually or in person, we're going to connect. And it just becomes part of our way.
And it's
Yeah.
part of the agenda, right?
That's
You
it.
make it part of the agenda. It's just part of the process.
That's it.
And that's connection before content. It's something that I know that we talk about a lot. I want to talk about this idea of being taken aback. We're taken aback when people just jump right in,
That's right.
right? And we've all been there. We've all been there when our energy is not matching the energy of the person that's coming in, and you're sort of saying trust that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's because there's something naturally speaking to us there, right? When you go into a restaurant and the waiter or waitress is like, okay, yeah, so what are you having? Right? I'm busy over here, right? And that seems to not be okay anywhere except for maybe New York City, right? But everywhere else around the world, right? Sort of, and even then, what's interesting is that when that happens, even the most trauma informed among us will attempt to try to understand what's going on with this person who's being transactional and not relational, and might say, "Oh, like that's a hard job," or like the restaurant is really busy and they just have a lot going on. What they're still trying to do is explain why there's a violation of the social contract, right? And that is social norm, just seeing each other first. And we've even made seeing each other first so habitualized that we even use words of checking in on people as simply just a greeting, right? Meaning that you walk by someone and you're like, "Hey, how you doing?" And then every once in a while, the person will stop you and tell you how they're doing, right? And you're like, "No, oh man, I messed up. I didn't mean to, really ask that. I just really meant, hey, right?" But you know, people have this human natural desire to want to be seen, to be understood. And that's what this is really tapping into.
Yeah. So why as leaders should we care about making that connection as opposed to moving on?
Yeah. Yeah, we shouldn't if and only if we are in the business of making widgets by ourselves that have absolutely zero contact with other human beings, except almost every other thing that is around human beings that is domesticated also requires connection before content, right? Right. You know, this is how you engage with horses and dogs, and I have no idea about cats, but you know, it's connection, right? It's what we do. So it's part of the natural human world to connect, and we violate it when we don't. And so, as leaders, we have so many really important things to do. And what I would say is the most important thing that we have to do as human beings and as leaders is to see our human beings that are actually going to be doing a lot of the real work that we're leading them to do. And so that's
And
what connection does.
that's powerful. So challenge. I think leaders, especially, understand needing to challenge one another, challenge themselves, challenge their teams, even challenge their clients and vendors. But you talk about it as something different, sitting in the space of accountability. What does that mean?
Yeah, that you know, there's a quality um to the world that requires us to do something, right? That there's that, you know, we call it that bias towards action or so. And that when all said and done, sometimes we say more than what we do, right? You know, and so what challenge does is it tries to close that gap and say that we say that we're about this thing, that we have relationships that are tenured in such that it allows us to do a thing. Let's do a thing, right? And also that it allows us to have the the relationship between safety and bravery. And what we've been experiencing a lot of in society, I would say, at least in the West, is this invitation to create brave spaces, right? And brave spaces and brave spaces. And that is so right, because a lot of the spaces that we've created haven't been safe for a lot of people, right? And so what we want to be able to do is create both safe and brave spaces, where connection affords us the opportunity to now speak truth. I'm not talking about your truth, my truth, right? Because I think that that's a misunderstanding, right? As you've recently written about, but it allows us, requires us to be able to face each other and say when a thing is not okay and when we're not in right standing with each other or our values, and
Mhm.
that's what challenge offers. The requirement to do that. That's a prerequisite for growth.
What is brave space?
Yeah. I think brave space for me is uh, being in those moments where it's difficult to say or to do a thing, because the conjuring up of fear, and that fear seems palpable, and we've got to draw on our reservoir of bravery and courage, to be able to do that, despite the fact that there might be consequences that come with that. The consequences are not our business. The consequences are sometimes the byproduct of circumstances that might even be out of our control. Alignment with our values is our business, and what Brave Spaces does is it creates a cultural norm for it to be okay to do that. And I think we got some opposite of Brave Spaces, right? I think we can create safe spaces that are sanitized, um, and we can call some spaces that are brave, but in reality, we're simply um, encouraging brutal honesty. And I think I heard one time that honesty that is not wrapped in, not that is not delivered with empathy and love, is really just brutality. That's why we call it brutal honesty. And so I think we can misunderstand both safe and brave spaces.
I love what you said when you said consequences are not our business. Alignment with our values is our business. And that
Yeah.
really puts the locus of control over how we are on us versus, thinking about what might not happen at the end of being who we are
That's
or at
right.
the end of something else, right? I want to also come back to something you said about brutal honesty, and I think that truth and honesty, when delivered with empathy, is full of connection, and doesn't that
Absolutely.
make it more impactful and beneficial to all parties?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, Govind, you're just getting at something. In general, what we say, right? So the formula is circular; it's not linear, right? So even though we've presented, right, connection plus challenge equals change, and connection and challenge are equal ingredients, but connection is the first among equals, right? It's the prettier cousin, right? If you will. And so connection should in many ways precede challenge, because connection builds up a currency that we can spend by challenging. That's powerful, right? However, every once in a while, the moment requires challenge, and we might not have the connection that we need, right? That something might need to be said or done despite having a lower level of connection. And what it gets exactly to what you're saying. If we do challenge really well, it can build connection. If we can give honesty with empathy, right, in the way that it needs to be, it will build deeper connection. We can grow stronger in the scar places, right? And we see this time and time again in relationships. I often reference male and masculine culture, and I ask men sometimes, "Hey, did you ever get into a physical fight with a friend when you were really young?" And many of the men, hand shoots up, right? And then I ask them, "Did you stop being friends?" And they look at me sort of oddly, like, "No, what are you talking about? No, of course not." Right? Now, I'm not bigging up the negative elements of toxic masculinity and negative male culture in that way. What I am suggesting, though, is that sometimes we can do challenge really well, and it creates a better bond and understanding between us, right? And that's certainly what it did for young men that I grew up with. That we were experiencing challenge with each other and also in the world, and created something different between us, a braiding together of dynamic personalities and energy.
It's really interesting because I think somebody out there is listening and saying, "Well, no, no, there are situations where I don't need currency to challenge people. I'm just out there challenging them, and
Yeah.
look at all the results I get.
Yeah.
This is great. What are you talking about?"
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, challenge in the absence of connection almost always leads to resistance. And what we might misrecognize as defiance or opposition, and defensiveness, when in reality, they're really saying, with their action or otherwise, that who are you? Who are you to talk to me that way? What gives you the right, to say what you said, to do what you've done? And unfortunately, those that lean heavy into the language of challenge often lean heavy into positional authority as well. Well, I've got a badge, or I've got this title, I've got this. So therefore, I can bring command control, right? And that's ultimately what is interesting, is that um, what challenge in the absence of connection looks like is control. Connection in the absence of challenge looks like support, right? And meaning it's one directional. Whatever I can do for you, whatever I can do, you are the center of the universe. So whatever I can do for you, right, is support. And what challenge in the absence of connection looks like is control. And what do I need to do to you to get you to do this thing? And an old civil rights leader, who was instrumental in my young life, he said that the universal law is, wherever there is oppression, there will be resistance, even if it cannot be seen with the naked eye. And so when we have leaders that are offering nothing but challenge in the absence of connection, there will be resistance, even if it cannot be seen with the naked eye. And what that often looks like is, wait one day when you don't have that external locus of control and see what happens.
Mm.
Right. And time again, we see that it's not real transformation, that it's really just superficial change. And I think conversely, same thing. Folks that have deep and profound connection in the absence of challenge, take away that external locus of support, and you see what happens, right? You've created dependency.
So what's the prize inside? What's inside this Kinder Egg as we apply connection and challenge? If we follow the model, what kind of change awaits? What kind of transformation can we inspire?
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's a great question. I think what we're talking about is change of kind and quality. And so at the micro level, at the personal level, these are the twin ingredients for personal transformation, right? Weight loss. It's the application of connection and challenge. In marriages or intimate relationships, right? When you need to be in that moment, in that season of qualitatively improving that relationship, it's those twin ingredients. Now, what kind of change, what kind of transformation, I think is dependent upon the context, right? But the best way that the two metaphors or so that I think I've been using is that, first of all, each of us speaks connection or challenge as a first language, right? As our mother tongue, right? That each one of us defaults, right? To, even if it is a 51-49 split, each of us has one of them as our mother tongue, right? So if your first language is connection, you lean towards relationships, harmony, seeking space and place for people to be able to be their full selves without apology. If your first language is challenge, then you're someone who is okay and deliciously accepting of metrics and results, right? And scorecards, right? All of that. But each of us speaks one of them. And so what is the language that is your first language to speak, right? And then how do you know, how does that show up? And then I think the other metaphor that I use is if you're old enough to remember a radio, right? And you've got the bass and the treble buttons, right? And that's really connection and challenge. And for those that were really into music, you might adjust the bass and the treble for every song that came on the radio because every song had its own calibration of bass and treble, right? To get it just right. What that looks like is every moment has its own bass and treble of connection and challenge. Every person, our relationship, you and I, has its own calibration of connection and challenge, right? My children, my family, we all have our own calibrations of that. And as leaders, our job is to find what that calibration is for the moment.
And that calibration is the starting point, right? It's
Absolutely.
not this it's we're not staying there. The idea is to move both of those up because that's where the change happens, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the reality is, Govind, that we couldn't stay there even if we wanted to. This is not about balance. Balance feels static. This is about the dynamic tension between those two things, right? And it feels alive, right? Like this is more salsa than it is the two step, right? This is the sway. This is the beauty of the dance, because life is not static. So we couldn't stay there. We couldn't have it fixed. It just wouldn't work.
One of the things I wonder about in your model, you talk about accountability, sitting in the space of accountability for challenge. Are you saying that if you have enough connection, you can hold somebody accountable?
I think if you have enough connection, it creates the opportunity for you to be able to say things and hold them accountable in a way that they will hear and they will feel and it will be meaningful, right? That's what connection affords you the opportunity to. Too often, though, folks that speak connection as their mother tongue worry about losing that connection by holding folks accountable, right? And something that you share, which I 100% agree with, is this notion of voluntary accountability, right? That ultimately accountability is more of a developing from within, right? And a gift that we give, right, to others versus holding accountable. And that's ultimately, I think, the willingness to give and volunteer your accountability, I think, is also predicated on the level of connection one has, right? We don't freely give that gift away to just any old body. right?
Yeah, I
I
think
think
I
that
think
is
what you're saying is that I think we all want to be accountable. We want to show up appropriately for each other, whatever that happens to mean, given the season or the situation. And and if we treat people as accountable in connection, and they show up as accountable, we are each holding up the standard. And this goes back to what you said is that the consequence is the outcome, and that's what most people hold up to be accountable to. I'm accountable to delivering an outcome, but instead we're
there it is.
holding our values in alignment.
The end relationship, right?
Right.
That 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 what community does is it reminds us that behind the metrics, behind the scorecard or whatever, is a relationship that we are willing to be accountable to, right? And when we are not being accountable, or when we bring harm into that relationship, then it has impact on those who we really care about, right? So that sense, and because of the nature of connection, that that accountability can have such nuances, right? So for instance, my own children know what my face looks like when I'm frustrated, right? And I know what their face looks like because I've seen their face since they've had a face, right? um, but they know what mine looks like because that's how they've lived as long as they have. If they didn't know what frustration looked like on this face, I don't know if they'd make it as, into their 20s and now almost 30s. And so, but because of that connection, they can read the subtleties of the challenge. And the challenge doesn't have to be as explicit, right? There's a lot of it that can be understood. Um, uh, Without it having to be overtly explained. There's nuances there to it.
Yeah, my children understand the way I breathe when I'm frustrated. Right? So I think most of us give ourselves too much credit for our ability to play poker with our kids,
That's exactly right.
especially with our
They
emotions.
they survive by knowing the subtleties of adult culture.
Yeah, no question. I
Yeah.
want to I want to shift gears a little bit because and in the intro I talk about how I'll talk about how you've published many books. You have a lot of tools available in your toolkit. I think it is powerful that you picked this one to share, and I want to talk a little bit about. I knew you were going to share this with me before
Yeah.
you came on, or at least I hoped you would, and then you did. What has changed for you that you've become so focused on your one thing, and that this is the door with which you open conversations in a broader world? And I think that's a little success secret that we should talk about, because you've refined your message from something very broad to something very sharp.
Yeah, yeah. And then because of the cyclical nature of it, right? I'm finding myself going deeper, like a root system, and broader, right? So a lot of the frameworks that I'm talking about now, I've got a couple ones that I'm sharing out now. One's called Do the Right Math, which I'm really excited about, right? The application of sort of a metaphor of math into how we understand change. There's another a framework that I'm sort of coining, nature's operating system, right, in which we look at sort of leadership lessons from nature and biomimicry, et cetera. And so as I'm playing with these, it does keep coming back um, to these twin pillars of connection and challenge, right? Whether it's in the natural world or in mathematics or so, it just keeps coming back to it. And so I'm finding resonance in it. It's echoing all throughout the work as a powerful formula. But honestly, there's some of this that traces to a conversation that you and I had years ago, and I don't know if you remember saying it, but we were talking about math a little bit, and what you said as I was presenting this notion of a formula was, you were saying that on both sides of complexity is simplicity. And what I loved, and I've shared those exact words with folks across 5 continents now. What I love about that is that an example I use is 1 + 1 = 2, right? Just as a simple formula, but necessary, right? The world, I don't know if it would be the same, right? 1 + 1 = 2. And then there's all this complex stuff. And then on the other side is E equals MC squared, right? As I think you gave me that as an example, and I still don't know what the hell that means, right? I have no idea what E equals MC squared, right? And whenever I share that, some folks from the audience come up to me afterwards and want to explain to me, and I tell them, don't do that because I'm still not going to get it. Quantum physics, multiverse, whatever. But the point is, though, that what both of those simple formulas have in common is a universal application. They are deeper than what's initially thought, right? And so for me, what connection plus challenge equals change, as simple as it is, it creates the invitation for a simple conversation and it creates the opportunity for a more complex conversation. However, the tone and temper and tenure and the tempo goes. And so that's what I keep finding so exciting about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, and that is those are exactly the two examples I gave you about the three integer equation. On one side is something a 2-year-old will understand and be
That's
able
it.
to do, especially as it relates to marshmallows, and
That's right. That's right.
right, but on the other side, um, having the ability to have deep conversations that transcend time and place, much like E equals MC squares does around around connection plus challenge equals change, and even energetically, you're speaking of one of the variables being energy itself. So I
That's
think
it.
I think that's also really interesting. If you relate it to E equals MC squared, I wonder, even when we think about it, is challenge the matter or not? Is it
Yeah.
about the thing? So maybe there are more parallels there than we thought. What has changed for you as you've become more simple about this in your application and your ability to communicate with diverse audiences around really complicated and important stuff? Because I want there's one more subject I want to hit with that.
Yeah. I don't know if I've got a great answer to that in terms of what's changed. I think when you continue to chew on a piece of thinking for a while, then you move at the speed of digestion. And what I've been doing is finding um, so many opportunities to really apply the formula. And what I've been really working with people around is helping to identify the elements of connection and the elements and ingredients of change of challenge inside of their work, inside of their families and their lives, right? And really thinking about what that looks like. Because back to something said earlier, like the consequences are not our business per se, right? Like the change itself. That's why I think I was having maybe a little bit of a pause in identifying what does the change look like, because it's really process over product, right? If the change itself is the thing that we accomplish, that we get, or whatever, what we can own is the process, right? And that's the level of connection and challenge. And so I've been getting much more clear, I think, on that. And then how does that play out in leadership across all levels? Um, and finding the language that people can, I think, really relate to in their own world for that.
So we're in an era of hyper challenge,
Hmm.
default to challenge. I, I
Yeah.
think I think seasonality. You talked about seasons and situations. The season is hyper challenge, hyper division, hyper critique, hyper
Mm.
sensitivity. In a time of division, in a time when people may be oppositional more quickly than they have been in the past, how does this formula play out?
Yeah, it's good. I think it's a misnomer to call it challenge, right? For instance, right? I heard someone say recently that social media is contact in the absence of connection, right? That it's contact, right? It's not connection, it's contact, right?
And it's full
And I think,
contact.
Yeah. Sometimes full body contact, right?
Right on.
Right.
Yeah.
Full body contact from a distance where I don't have to be seen and face, right? So, but that's, I think, what we might misrecognize as challenge is not that. It's really control, right? It's yelling. It's the confrontation instead of conversation. It's the control instead of challenge, right? Because what challenge offers is a relationship to connection, and what connection offers is a relationship to challenge. And what I think we are doing sometimes in our own echo chambers is offering folks only contact, calling it connection, and with someone who we look for the differences in order to be offended, we are offering them control, trying to control them, and confrontation in the absence of challenge, right? And so um, I think ultimately, I don't even know if it's division, right, per se, because division is a complex type of math. This stuff isn't complex at all,
Hmm.
right? This is the slicing and dicing up of folks. And there are real differences between people's worldviews, right? And ideologies, right? So I don't want to diminish that and downplay it, right? And say, no, we're all just saying the same thing. No, we're not all saying the same thing. And we're not all fighting for the same thing. We don't all believe in the same thing. We all don't value each other in the same way. So I do want to make that clear. Um, but we're not often even seeing folks as human beings, we're othering them. And if what do they say? The first rule of genocide is to dehumanize your enemy. You have to make them not even be human beings. That's why, a claim like Black Lives Matter was simple, but really sort of, at least I think, really powerful in a way, because it was simply saying, my life matters. Like, I'm a human being. And I think that that cry out to each other about humanity is what's being violated. Yeah. Yeah.
How do we make sure? I think sometimes what we do online influences our three-dimensional world, and versa. But mostly, I mean, I think it was intended to be the other way around, but it's
Yeah.
actually what
Yeah.
happens in the two-dimensional world comes into our three-dimensional world pretty quickly. How do we clarify contact versus challenge? How do we clarify that in the real world when
Yeah.
we're
Well, I
speaking
mean,
to each other?
yeah, yeah. Well, one, I think our digital warriors need to be able to create an algorithm where we cannot hide behind usernames in that, right? Like, I'm not for the anonymity. I'm really not, right? I don't think that that breeds more truthfulness. I think that it creates. That's why I don't agree with anonymous surveys or anything like that. Let's stand on what we stand on, right? And it's much harder. Was it Trevor Noah said that bias doesn't hold up very well to proximity, right? And when I have to see you and understand you, it's much more difficult to claim that I can't see you or be with you. Yeah, I think it's partly that, right? I think it's also the community holding itself to standards and saying we will not stand for, allow, and not speak out against folks who show up in the world this way. And unfortunately, what we do is we make them our champions, right? And or martyrs or whatever else, right? Like the most bold, bodacious, loud, arrogant thing that is on a microphone gets that microphone more often than others, and that is a failure, I think, of community, right? Being able to challenge in that way. Yeah.
So what I heard you say, and I'm just trying to find another C word, but when you're contact versus challenge, you close a gap. You just close the
Yeah.
gap, get closer. Because if
That's
you
it.
get closer, that tends to crystallize what's really being said, doesn't it?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. And proximity allows us to look underneath the words for what is being said, right? And what's being trying to be said, even though it's what I don't quote Bill Cosby very often, especially nowadays, but I think he said something like, you can serve a gourmet meal on a beautiful set of china or on the top of a trash can, right? And how it's delivered really matters. And so we can hold each other accountable to that, still recognizing that it's a gourmet meal, right? Despite the fact that it's being shared in a way that's ugly, right? So looking for some of the value underneath of that. And that's what contact does. Yep.
Yeah. Contact also allows us to be transparent about what's actually happening and recognize the trash can for the trash can.
That's it.
You know,
That's it.
when we're far away from something, we might not see the trash can. We might just see it as being a black countertop or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
right? But we don't recognize it.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think every once in a while we've got to look away from those who we hold in awe, because they can speak really well, they can rap really well, right? We've got to look away from them, and we have to look at the faces of those who they're spitting their venom against, right? In their ire. Like look at those faces, right? And see the humanity in those folks, as to mitigate, right, what is being said, as to whether or not it has the same kind of value that we are thinking, right? And I think that that's what I'm hoping folks will do with me. That, I can say and put some words together pretty well sometimes, but is it landing in the way that reflects values that I say that I'm about? Yeah.
When you feel the burden of contact, how do you get recentered?
Ooh. Yeah, when the burden of contact comes up and it feels like it's that call to connect. It's that call to connect, right? I'm trying to find the science of me and my relationships in it, right? So, for instance, my wife and I have been married 31 years. What we realized several years ago was, in a disagreement, when the emotion is getting a bit heated, when the following words are said by anyone, and those words are, wait, wait, let me finish speaking. When those words come up, it's like a big red flag. What it really is saying is that the person who's saying them is not feeling heard and feels the need to um, uh, call timeout on the field, or the person who is being told that, right, is not waiting their turn. And now we're not dancing. We're stepping on each other's toes, right? And it's not mechanical. You speak, I speak, you speak, right? But it's a natural flow. We're out of sync with that flow. And so what I'm trying to do for myself is find those trigger moments when more contact, more connection is needed, because my first language is challenge. And so I can be well versed in that, fluent in challenge. And so I've got to have some moments where I'm noticing that the person isn't with me, and we need to pull back and maybe go a bit more in connection.
I love that. Malik, you and I could talk for hours and for days, and we've done both of
Absolutely.
those things. Our time is wrapping up here today, and our tradition with the show now, it's a new tradition, a year-long tradition, where we honor John Rulin. He gave us a napkin early on
Yeah.
in the journey, which is what you appreciates. He passed away suddenly, and we've been paying forward his mission of gratitude ever since. So let me ask you, is there someone you'd like to shout out and appreciate as we close here today?
Wow. So, first of all, I love that, and appreciate how you honor that and keep that alive. There's a lot of people, because I was a community lift. I continue to be so, right? I'm too heavy, literally and figuratively, for just one set of arms and shoulders. But one person that comes to mind in this particular moment is Dean Harry Bradshaw Matthews. And he was instrumental in my young life. Right around 14, 15, he introduced me to a pathway of leadership that wasn't about using my body as a wannabe athlete, or my muscles, or anything like that. He gave me a pathway um, towards scholarship that was rooted in Black excellence. And and I he was very special to me then, and I attribute much of my pursuit in higher education to him. So yeah, Dean Harry Bradshaw Matthews, dynamic brother.
I love that. Thank you, Malik.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Thank you for joining me and Dr. Malik Muhammad on Paper Napkin Wisdom. His napkin, connection plus challenge equals change, is more than an equation. It's a way of living and leading. What stood out for you today? For me, it was that challenge is the catalyst. It disrupts comfort and calls us into something greater. That the balance between connection and challenge is where transformation happens. One without the other falls flat. That change is co-created, not imposed. Leadership is about walking alongside others and not forcing them forward. That legacy in leadership is relational, not transactional. It's measured in trust, empowerment, and growth. As you think back on this episode, consider, where in your life do you need to lean harder into connection? Where do you need to offer a challenge? And what change could be unlocked if you combined the two? If this conversation sparked something for you, subscribe, review, and share Paper Napkin Wisdom with someone who needs to hear this message. When you do, you help more entrepreneurs and leaders step into these ideas and turn them into action. And here's your challenge. Take a napkin and write down your own equation for change and share it with us with the hashtag Paper Napkin Wisdom. What's the connection you need to strengthen, and what challenge will you bring alongside it? Remember, wisdom written small can spark massive change. Take this idea, put it to action, and turn your small shifts into big results, and make it a great day.